Hi everybody, my name is Joe Pfeiffer and I'm a NetBackup product manager here at Symantec. Before I was working in product management, I worked as a NetBackup engineer, and so what I'd really like to do today is spend some time talking about the details of Veritas Backup Reporter and how you can use the product to generate a success rate criteria for yourselves. So when you think about success rate, it's usually a very simple concept. Most people think it's a number between 0 and 100%, but the details are really in how you arrive at that single number. And that's what I really want to speak to today. So the best way to probably explain this is to go over an example situation of how you would calculate a success rate within Veritas Backup Reporter. So let's take the scenario here where you have a backup window. That backup window, say, begins at 6 p.m. and it goes through the next night into the morning of 6 a.m. So you have a 12-hour backup window here. And throughout the course of the night, let's say you have 3 backups that take place. The first one occurs at 8 p.m. and it fails. It retries that same backup 2 hours later at 10 p.m. and that also fails. And then let's say at midnight, you have a success. So the real question here is, how do you calculate a success rate based on this scenario? Now, if you look at all the situations that occurred here, technically you had 2 out of 3 failures. So that if you were to look at everything that's going on here, that would be a 33% success rate. So that's one way to look at this. The other way to look at it is, since the last backup that occurred was successful, you could actually say that this was 100% successful. Because yeah, it took a couple times to retry it, but at the end of the night, the backup still took place and it's still there. The other way you could look at this is, depending on the type of failures, maybe you want to exclude a particular one. So let's say this first backup here was canceled with a status 150. That's the classic status of a NetBackup administrator, actually user interacting with it and canceling that backup. So there's no infrastructure failure or anything that caused that backup. So maybe we want to exclude this and only include that as a failure. So in that situation, you actually have 66% as your success rate. So here we already have one situation and 3 different success rate criterias. Now the other way you could look at this is maybe just an example of one particular server. Maybe your schedules or your policies are set up that not everything's backed up within this time window. Or better yet, perhaps you have other servers that are not actually active in the environment anymore and don't even need to be backed up. So when you're looking at success rate, those would actually count against you, whereas maybe you have 1,000 hosts and 100 of them are retired and not being backed up. You would want those 100 excluded from that calculation, otherwise you would never be able to get higher than, say, 90%. So there's lots of ways to be able to go into Backup Reporter and generate these different numbers. Now we have out-of-box reports that actually give you these 3 scenarios. We have what we call a first attempt. And first attempt will look at just the first time a backup kicks off for each individual host within a policy. You can also look at all attempts, which will give you the 33% number because it will look at all the retries and all the jobs that ran. And then the last thing you can do is look at the last attempt, which is basically ensuring that you have at least one backup and your final status of what occurred in this environment. Now within each one of these, you have the ability to exclude certain types of error codes. So perhaps you want to exclude status 150 since you trust your administrators that if they're going to cancel it, that they're allowed to do that. There might be other situations where perhaps this failure at 10 p.m. here was a network timeout. And so since you had a network timeout occur at that time and you knew it was a planned downtime, you want to exclude that. So you have the ability to exclude certain types of error codes. And finally, the other thing that you can do is exclude hosts based on a criteria we call inactive or active. So if you have a host that has been retired and you want to keep that information in that backup because there's backup images that are retained there, you can set this attribute for active, inactive, and then automatically exclude hosts that are inactive from things like success rate and RPO type reports. So this really gives you a lot of different situations for how you end up calculating this single number. And really the reason for calculating this single number has to do with who's going to be actually looking at that report. Now, if you were to send to, say, management a report showing that you had 33% success, they may actually be really worried because 33% shows that perhaps a lot of the environment hasn't been backed up. Whereas in this scenario, the backups actually happened, it just took a couple times to actually do them. So for management, you may want to send them a report that shows 100% or whatever your final status is. Now the administrators probably care more about how many times it took to retry so that they can troubleshoot and figure out what failures are going on and eliminate those so that they can reduce that backup window and have backups be successful on the first attempt rather than the last attempt. So perhaps for your administrators, they look at a report that shows 33%. And then the last situation for users here is if you're a service provider. So if you're a service provider, you may have within your contract or within your negotiations, you want to make sure that certain error codes are actually excluded. So perhaps you have a planned downtime that can be excluded from that contract, and then you can send reports out that show those as being excluded and don't count against any sort of success rate criteria. So as you can see, there's a number of ways to create a success rate report, and Veritas BackUp Reporter really tries to give you a number of out-of-box solutions to quickly arrive at that number, but still be able to customize and come up with a number of ways to get the actual success rate number that you really require. And that's what Veritas BackUp Reporter is all about, customizability for long-term historical business analysis. For more information about Veritas BackUp Reporter, you can visit our website and register for a live demo webcast where we can show you the actual reports as they're generated and work with you to really demonstrate what the product can do for you.